in Chinese 学术经过. Her Research Global Distinguished Scholar Lecture Series is organized by the Department of Cultural Industry Management, School of Media and Communication, Shanghai Jiaotong University, with the support of our global network partners. I am Pan Jiting Yip Yejiting. I'm the team lead and the founder of the research. I'm very happy that today our team, our students and colleagues are here to join us to this big event, public lecture given by Esther Piran, which is my PhD co-supervisor. I'm very happy that you accept our invitation. So in this her research public lecture, we invite outstanding researchers with diverse backgrounds to share their research and also academic insights with our audience. 希望可以，因为我们I will shift Chinese for the introduction because we have Chinese students. 学术经过为上海交通大学媒体与传播学院文化产业管理师生团队主办，并由各大院校的老师们一起跟我们合作做公开的学术文化交流活动。我们的讲座希望可以通过不同的学姐还有不同的学生分享多元化的全球视野的学术研究并且可以跟我们的业界专家分享不同的研究经验。Today, I'm very happy that Esther joined us for this event, and may I introduce Esther to all our colleagues and also our students. Esther Piran is Professor of Cultural Analysis at the University of Amsterdam and Academic Director of the Amsterdam School for Cultural Analysis, ASCO. She directs the project Imagining the Role in Globalizing World, funded by the European Research Council, and her publications include a spectral metaphor, Living Ghosts and the Agents of Invisibility, and the edit volumes, Peripheral Visions in the Globalizing Present. Also, another very good book, Global Cultures of Contestation, and the other books, Past and Peripheral Imaginations of Globalization. A new edit volume on planetary hinterlands is forthcoming. We look forward to that. And may I use Chinese to briefly introduce Esther? Esther Piran 教授是河南安姆斯特丹大学的文化分支教授，同时也是安姆斯特丹大学文化分支学院的学术总监。他的研究方向包括边缘化的过程、主体，还有全球化对农村地区的这个影响、中心还有边缘化的动态关系。以下是有关我们的团队。Herewith is a brief biography of Esther Piran. If you're interested, please search Esther's work online. Amazing work, amazing publications. And today I'm very honored to have our male colleague, our professor, to join our research event. Today we have our discussant, Guo Liangwen Professor. Guo Liangwen is Distinguished Professor of the School of Media and Communication at Shanghai Jiaotong University. Dr. Guo obtained dual PhD degree, first on the Department of Sociology at the University of California, UCLA in 1991, and second from the School of Media Female Theatre at the University of New South Wales in 2006. Dr. Guo's research interests include media sociology, Aboriginal and ethnic media, participation in communication, cyber society, and qualitative methodologies. And I have to shift Chinese. Please forgive my accent. 郭良文教授是上海交大媒体与传播学院常聘教授。郭良文教授曾经担任台湾交通大学传播研究所，还有本科毕业之后出国留学，先后取得2个博士学位，并在1991年取得美国加州大学洛杉矶UCLA 社会学的博士。之后在2006年完成了澳大利亚新南维尔士大学媒体与传播博士学位，研究领域主要为媒体社会学、少数民族传播发展、参与式传播、网络社会以及自行研究方法。Today, I'm very proudly to present my team to Esther Piran, who is my teacher, and you can see my colleagues at Shanghai Jiaotong University, Dr. Zhu Lingjia, Dr. Zhou Dong, and also our collaborator, Dr. Liu Xi from the Department of Chinese Studies at Xi'an Jiaotong Liverpool University, as well as our PhD students, our brilliant PhD students, postgraduate students, and also our undergraduate student who's helping us to set up today's lecture. Thank you very much. Please allow me to give a big applause to Esther Piran.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Dr. Ip, Pen, with whom I have very good memories of working together in Amsterdam. And I'm very proud that she's now working at your university. And thank you, Pen, for inviting me to speak in this wonderful lecture series, and to all of you for being here, especially Dr. Kuo Liang Wen, who I'm honored to meet today. It is a great pleasure to share with you some thoughts about my work in cultural analysis, which stretches from my dissertation completed in 2005 and published in 2008 by Stanford University Press as Intersubjectivities and Popular Culture, Wachtin and Beyond, to my current research project on rural imaginations, funded by the European Research Council. And now I'm going to share my screen so that you can see my PowerPoint, I hope. Is this my PowerPoint, or have I shared my... Oh, are you seeing my PowerPoint, or are you seeing my email?
It works.
Oh, you're seeing the PowerPoint. Okay, there's just something weird with my own image. Okay, then I will just proceed and press the button for the PowerPoint as it is supposed to go. So I think of my work as focusing on the cultural imagination rather than on media-specific representations, for two reasons. First, the term cultural imagination recognizes cultural products as more than representational. As the Russian literary theorist Mikhail Bakhtin, who's been my most constant theoretical touchstone, points out, literature and other art forms do not reflect social reality, but refract it in imaginative ways through particular forms and techniques. These refractions in turn affect social reality, shaping how it is encountered as reality. French philosopher Paul Ricoeur, moreover, has argued that the imagination operates in two directions, towards, on the one hand, ideology as conservative and integrative, and as masking its imaginariness, and on the other, utopia as subversive, inventive, and explicitly imaginary. Utopia as proceeding from no place, an eccentric site, Ricoeur likens to a ghost city, harbors transformative promise, but may also culminate in nostalgic escapism. The cultural imagination, then, is not necessarily progressive. Is my PowerPoint moving? Because I can't see it, which is very strange.
It's not.
I'm trying. I can't get to the... Let me see. Sorry, I'm not used to working with this program, so I cannot see my PowerPoint.
Yeah. Is it better if I help share your PowerPoint?
Yeah, that might be better, because I'm not seeing it, so I don't know when it's moving or not moving.
No problem. So I can share it. So stop sharing.
I don't have the button for stop sharing either, somehow. Ah, now I see it. Ah, yes. Ah, good. It's back. Okay, great. Now I can see the interface again. Sorry about that, but if you could share the PowerPoint pen, that would be great. Ah, yes. Could you go to the next slide? Yes, and I will just say next slide when I need the next one, but this is perfect. Okay, so where was I? French philosopher Paul Ricoeur, moreover, has argued that the imagination operates in two directions, towards, on the one hand, ideology as conservative and integrative and as masking its imaginariness, and on the other, utopia as subversive, inventive, and explicitly imaginary. Utopia as proceeding from no place, an eccentric site Ricoeur likens to a ghost city, harbors transformative promise, but may also culminate in nostalgic escapism. The cultural imagination then is not necessarily progressive, but always more than a simple mirroring of reality. As such, it accommodates what the German artist Hito Steyerl refers to as post-representation's ability to highlight the unforeseen things and noise obscured by representational theories. Second, with the lines between media increasingly blurred and audiences consuming multiple media in quick succession and even simultaneously, it no longer makes sense to look at literature, film, television, or other media in isolation only. Instead, it is imperative to view both the cultural imagination as the dominant refraction of social reality at any one time, locally, nationally, or globally, and specific cultural imaginations, which may affirm or challenge this dominant refraction as produced across different media. Next slide. To pinpoint how the cultural imagination refracts social reality, I use the approach of cultural analysis, developed at the Amsterdam School of Cultural Analysis, of which I am currently the director, most influentially by Dutch narratologist Mieke Bal, who you see here on the slide. Bal pioneered cultural analysis as an interdisciplinary approach within the humanities for analyzing cultural objects of all kinds. The aim is not just to understand an object's meanings and effects, but also to explain how these meanings and effects contribute to the theorization and hence illumination of contemporary societal problems. In Bal's work, and that of many like me who have followed her, analysis unfolds as a dynamic, or in Bachtin's terms, dialogic encounter between the analyzing subject, the cultural object, and the theoretical concept. All three bring something to the analysis, and all three should be changed over its course. The analyzing subject made to question her initial assumptions, the object turned into more than an illustration of the concept, and the concept adapted as a result of the challenges brought to it by the object's particularities. Next slide. Cultural analysis holds to 4 principles, of which the first and for me most important one is the imperative to look closely at your cultural object. Next slide. The greatest trap a cultural analyst can fall into is jumping too quickly from the object to the theory, as theorizing is often considered a more serious and more accomplished pursuit than analyzing. However, although there is no cultural analysis without theorization, there is also no cultural analysis without a sustained attending to the object. Next slide. Second, in attending to the object, we should be aware of what we bring to it. As analysts with particular backgrounds, disciplinary, cultural, and personal, I will not notice the same things about a particular object as someone else. And therefore, I should recognize, as Jonathan Culler puts it, that my analysis is conditioned by my place in the present and is thus involved in what it seeks to analyze. In other words, I am not an objective outsider to the analysis, but I am an active part of it that also influences what comes out of the analysis. Next slide. Third, the object should be, as Bal has modeled throughout her work, allowed to speak back to the analyzing subject's assumptions, as well as to the theories and concepts mobilized in relation to it. We allow an object to speak back by attending to the gaps and frictions between what we think it will help us to say when we pick it as our object and what it tells us once we have thoroughly, though never exhaustively, explored it. We have to allow the object to surprise us and lead us in different directions than expected. Next slide. Finally, we have to ask what our analysis of the object adds to the theories and concepts we bring it into dialogue with. Cultural analysis is never a question of just applying a concept to an object, of saying that this novel or this television series or this film exemplifies, is no more than an example of, a particular theoretical point. The object should also be made to do theory, supplementing existing theoretical work and adding to the development of conceptual frameworks. It is not enough for an analysis to present a new interpretation of an object. The analysis should make a larger point about a broader theoretical question. Next slide. Attending carefully to cultural objects can be done in many ways, but as someone who at heart is a literary scholar, I rely on close reading, which requires, in Color's words, a respect for the stubbornness of texts. Such respect is shown by attending to what film scholar Eugenie Brinkema evocatively calls the wild and many fecundities of specificity of the text. Those aspects that only fully reveal themselves under careful scrutiny. Close reading has gone through many permutations since the new critics developed it in the United States after the Second World War, shedding its reluctance to consider contexts, materialities, and affects, and expanding from a literary method to one suitable for all kinds of texts, including visual and digital ones. What I consider the essence of close reading is, first, its emphasis on a careful contingent encounter with the text, a modest rather than masterful reading and rereading that pays detailed attention to the specificities of both form and content, and second, its acknowledgement of the text as an endlessly recontextualized and reconfigured site of meaning making that preempts instantaneous, complete, or definitive understandings. Although in 2010, Color could still argue that close reading, like apple pie, is something we are all in favor of, since then it has, as Brinkema wrote in 2014, become utterly unfashionable. Most notably, Stephen Best and Sharon Marcus, to legitimate their turn to surface reading, have argued that close reading amounts to, and I quote, a mode of interpretation that assumes that a text's truest meaning lies in what it does not say, describes textual surfaces as superfluous, and seeks to unmask hidden meanings, unquote. Despite this being a gross mischaracterization of virtually all forms of close reading, the idea that it is a colonizing practice that empowers the critic at the expense of the text has gained a surprising amount of traction, leading to support not only for surface reading, but also for other forms that purport to avoid going deep, such as descriptive reading, post-critical reading, and even just reading. Leaving aside the question of whether it is at all possible to separate a text's surface from its depth, given language's capacity for polysemy and figuration, if close reading is taken to involve a careful attending to the text, which is explicitly invited to trouble the analyst's expectations, then the text's manifest content is not disregarded but taken seriously as a responsive and vertically and horizontally expansive space of meaning making. Under sustained attention, it expands vertically to reveal what Best and Marcus call hidden meanings, which are not really hidden, but traced accountably from the surface. The text also expands horizontally to reveal more of and more connections between what makes up the surface. Best and Marcus use a particular metaphor to summarize their argument, positing that surface reading is about, and I quote, letting ghosts be ghosts, instead of saying what they are ghosts of, unquote. This ignores that ghosts, as I have shown in my work, and here you can see 3 of my texts that deal with ghosts, are per definition and quite literally the return of something other than what they appear as, meaning that they need to be attended to as traces of something else. A lot of my work in cultural analysis has been about attending to ghosts. What do I mean by this? I have to disappoint anyone expecting this question to lead to a discussion of the possibility of life after death. I am not a paranormal investigator, and this will not be a seance. Rather than looking for actual ghosts, I focus on ghosts as metaphors capable of doing theoretical work. Conceiving of the persistent effects of colonialism, the marginalized lives of undocumented migrants, or the threat of environmental catastrophe as ghostly, spectral, or haunting does not merely create lively images, but can help to come to a deeper understanding of these phenomena. In the volumes Popular Ghosts and the Spectralities Reader, edited with my fellow ghost thinker and good friend Maria del Pilar Blanco at the University of Oxford, and in my monograph The Spectral Metaphor, the main aim was to emphasize that this metaphor, which is really a set of metaphors, including those of the ghost, the specter, the spirit, the phantom, and haunting, possession, conjuration, and exorcism, should not be generalized. Not everything is like a ghost, and not everything that is like a ghost in the same way. If only because across history and in different cultures, many types of ghosts are found, fulfilling a range of functions and evoking divergent responses from fear to fascination. Next slide. The translucent, white-sheeted ghosts figured in this 2013 New Yorker cartoon by Bruce Eric Kaplan are only one example of what a ghost can look like. Significantly, the reason this cartoon is funny is because the woman on the couch ascribes her jitteriness not only to the apparition of no less than 5 ghosts in her living room, but also, and in the first place, to having drunk too much coffee. All that coffee and all these ghosts are making me jittery. The downturned mouths of the ghosts suggest their dismay at having the effect of their supernatural presence equated and subordinated to that of something as mundane as coffee, when surely their presence alone should be enough to disturb, and to do so beyond the point of mere jitteriness. The joke then hinges on the ghosts not being attended to by the woman as expected. Both the ghosts and the expectations about the kind of reaction they will inspire need to be understood in their specificity for us to get the joke. The same goes for any instantiation of the spectral metaphor. Whether something is called ghostly or haunting, whenever something is called ghostly or haunting, we should ask what exactly it is thought to have in common with a ghost or haunting, and what the highlighting of this communality tells us, both about that which is deemed ghostly or haunting, and about ghosts and haunting as concepts. A metaphor, after all, does not work through simple substitution, but establishes a dynamic interplay between two terms that carries over meaning in both directions. Next slide. So, in what ways has the spectral metaphor been used by myself and others since becoming, in the so-called spectral turn of the 1990s, somewhat of a master trope across the humanities and social sciences? And what can be learned from attending to this metaphor in its different guises? The French philosopher Jacques Derrida, in what is undoubtedly the most influential text of the spectral turn, Spectres of Marx, first published in French in 1993, spins out a reading of the ghost in Shakespeare's Hamlet into an account of the spectre as a figure that puts time out of joint by simultaneously returning from the past and announcing its imminent reappearance in the future. The spectre, for Derrida, stands for the entanglement of past, present, and future, as well as for the impossibility of locating singular origins. Even in its first appearance, after all, the ghost in Hamlet is also already a return of Hamlet's father. In Derrida's famous neologism, the spectre turns ontology into hauntology. Although it is effective in challenging teleological accounts of history and conceptions of identity as self-sameness, I find Derrida's theory of spectrality too generalizing. In positing somewhat of an every ghost, he glosses over the specificities of the ghost of Hamlet's father, as emerging, for example, from a distinct moment in the history of Christianity. He also does not sufficiently consider the gap between the power wielded by this sovereign spectre as the ghost of a king, indicated by his imposing posture in the Henry Fuseli print on the cover of the first English translation of Spectres of Marx, and the powerlessness of other spectral figures, such as those the Cameroonian political theorist Achille Mbembe describes as suffering under present-day necropolitical regimes oriented towards, and I quote, the generalized instrumentalization of human existence and the material destruction of human bodies and populations, unquote. The latter have little in common with the commanding ghost depicted by Shakespeare or the terrifying ghosts of horror movies. They resemble a different type of ghost whose invisibility and immateriality signify insignificance, expendability, and a radical lack of agency. Instead of being shoved onto one hauntological heap, then, each instance of the spectral metaphor should be attended to in its specificity. Next slide. Avery Gordon's 1997 study Ghostly Matters is more attuned to the fact that not all ghosts are equal, as is clear from her careful reading of what the simultaneously possessive and dispossessed ghost in Toni Morrison's novel Beloved reveals about the horrors of slavery. Since then, the spectral metaphor has been used to conceptualize how slavery and other histories of violent oppression, as well as their legacies, have been ghosted, forgotten, repressed, or actively erased, while also maintaining a haunting presence. Other scholars have detailed the ghostliness of present-day phenomena, from finance, capitalism, and big data in their seeming ungraspability and incontestability, to the experiences of what I call living ghosts, people like undocumented migrants or domestic workers whose lives are characterized by a specific form of social invisibility. More recently, attention has focused on the spectral metaphor's ability to elucidate our relation to the future now that we face, as the editors of a volume entitled Futures and Fictions put it, and I quote, the specter of all kinds of futures likely being curtailed, unquote. At a time when the future no longer appears as a potentiality, but as a possible, probable, no future, conceiving of it as spectral or haunting offers a way to think this future as impressing itself upon the present, and therefore as requiring action right here, right now, but also as something that is not linear, singular, unitary, or certain, and thus capable of being changed. Next slide. As emphasized in another recent volume, Arts of Living on a Damaged Planet, one half of which is titled Ghosts, a prominent characteristic of ghosts is their indeterminacy. Because it is never clear what exactly they are, ghosts can teach us how to deal with uncertainty, with not knowing, and how to do so in a way that amounts to what Donna Haraway calls staying with the trouble. In her book of that title, Haraway writes that, and I quote, staying with the trouble requires learning to be truly present, as mortal creatures entwined in myriad unfinished configurations of places, times, matters, meanings, unquote. This notion of learning to be truly present, much like Derrida's injunction to live with ghosts rather than to exorcise them, implies taking note of and responsibility for our inevitable deep entanglements with what is other to us by attending to these entanglements. Notably, one of the dictionary meanings of to attend is to be present at. Attending to ghosts, then, requires for them to first be acknowledged. But what if that does not happen? What if impending environmental disaster is not seen as a haunting requiring a response, but as a figment of the imagination or a distant problem that can be endlessly deferred? What if the trouble is not stayed with or attended to because it is not recognized as trouble? This is where it becomes necessary to rethink the relationship between ghosts and haunting. Haunting tends to be seen as an inalienable attribute of ghosts, as something that all ghosts do, making it possible for Derrida to use hauntology as shorthand for his theory of spectrality. Gordon, too, in describing a haunting as, and I quote, an animated state in which a repressed or unresolved social violence is making itself known, unquote, presents ghosts and haunting as inextricably entwined. Against this, I want to suggest that certain preconditions need to be met before a repressed or unresolved social violence can make itself known in a way that produces a sense of what Gordon calls something to be done. A certain quality of attention and attendance, a readiness to wait upon and heed the ghost, to mind it, is required on the part of society, or at least a critical mass within it. Or else, how can it be explained that not all unresolved pasts, disavowed presents, or catastrophic futures make themselves known with equal force? Next slide. In the end, haunting implies more than the mere presence of a ghost, as David Lowery's 2017 film, A Ghost Story, shows. In this film, a young man, identified in the credits as C, dies in a car accident and returns as a ghost to the house he lived in with his girlfriend M. His status as a ghost is signaled by his appearing as a white sheet with black eye holes, as you can see on the image. It is hard to think of a more cliched portrayal, yet the ghost turns out to be anything but a cliche, as the film confounds our expectations of what a ghost should be able to do and what a ghost film should look and sound like. In long takes, the camera registers C's ghost observing M, grieve, and eventually move out, mostly without making his presence known. Only in a fit of jealousy, when she brings home and kisses another man, does he make some books fly off a shelf, but no sustained haunting ensues. Consequently, C's ghost is not attended to, except by another ghost in the house across the street. The first scene between the two ghosts underlines their passivity, their inability to haunt. Next slide. Could you play the video? I hope there will be sound, but even without the sound, it will be okay. Thank you. Next slide. So what's important here is that what you hear over this fragment is just music, and you don't hear the ghosts speak, you just see the subtitles. So they are essentially quite powerless figures who don't really know why they are still there and what they are supposed to be doing, other than waiting for something or someone, but they don't know who or what. So these ghosts linger without seeming to know why and cannot be said to haunt. When the neighborhood is eventually demolished, the ghost across the road, standing amid the rubble, sadly notes, "I don't think they're coming," before dematerializing, the sheet falling to the ground. C's ghost remains. When high-rise office buildings replace the neighborhood, he tries to terminate his presence by jumping off a ledge, but this only propels him back in time, where he passively looks on as a pioneer family plans to build a house, but is killed by indigenous Americans. Eventually, a house does get built, and the ghost witnesses himself and M moving in. Upon seeing himself after the accident return as a ghost, there are now two ghosts of C in the house. The first ghost finally retrieves a note M had hidden in a crack in the walls before moving out and reads it, after which he disintegrates. As viewers, we are not shown what the note says, but given that the disappearance of C's ghost is formally identical to that of the ghost across the road, a non-event rather than a momentous one, it seems unlikely that the note gives meaning to his ghostly existence. A likelier interpretation is that the note, perhaps by not referring to C at all, confirms the futility of the ghost lingering, the fact that he is not being attended to, not even by time itself, which threatens to endlessly loop his life. In the end, then, rather than the ghost appearing in line with Derrida's theory as a powerful force that puts time out of joint, here it is the ghost who is defeated by time as an infinite cyclical trap. The film suggests that haunting is not simply what all ghosts do. Rather, its occurrence and force are dependent upon what the ghost can or cannot do, and upon a certain quality of attention and attendance on the part of the living. This shifts the focus from the ethical-political choice to be made once a haunting has been established, between trying to exorcise the ghost and learning to live with it, to the ethical-political question of which hauntings we, through the distribution of our attention and inattention, make possible or impossible. Next slide. Why is such a shift important? Because it opens our eyes to the fact that many phenomena that are said to haunt us do not actually do so. An example can be found in a 2019 New York Times article where Brian Stevenson details how the fear of Black people and the taste for violent punishment that characterized slavery continue to feed into the American criminal justice system. When, at the end of the article, he notes that, and I quote, "We must acknowledge that the 400 years of injustice that haunt us," unquote, this constitutes a paradox, for if this history already haunted American society, it would not still need acknowledgement. Being largely unattended to and violently denounced when it is brought to the fore by a movement like Black Lives Matter, this history and its effects in the present do not in fact haunt American or global society in a pervasive manner, and that is the problem. The sentence then should really read, "We must acknowledge the 400 years of injustice and attend to the ghosts it has produced so that they may haunt us." Moreover, careful consideration should be given to who the we and the ghosts in this sentence are. In future and for the future, lingering ghosts like those of slavery must be attended to in a way that enables them to haunt and to keep haunting, so that the trouble is stayed with rather than ignored, dismissed, or confined to the past. Of course, those put in the possession of dispossessed ghosts have no choice but to stay with the trouble. But those in more privileged positions, like myself, must choose to do so. Attending to ghosts means facing my blind spots, acknowledging what I, from my position, can afford not to notice or disavow, and listening to and minding other perspectives, also when these perspectives challenge traditions or versions of history I am implicated in and may feel attached to. It means experiencing discomfort and losing some of my footing, not just momentarily, but in an enduring way. But what it does not entail is any dispossession comparable to that of those made to live as ghosts. Next slide. My current research project on rural imaginations, on which I have been working with a wonderful team of 2 postdocs, Hanneke Stuit and Emily Ung, and 5 PhD candidates, Anke Bosma, Lelia Tavakoli Farsuni, Chaling Valdes Olmos, Zhao Shun, and Xiao Xiao, is all about acknowledging blind spots and trying to understand why some people are hesitant or even resistant to do this. The idea for the project came to me when, as vice director of the Amsterdam Center for Globalization Studies, I noticed how discussions about globalization privilege its effects on urban areas. Rural globalization, while undoubtedly real, is mostly ignored, making the rural, in Gayatri Spivak's words, the forgotten front of globalization. This blind spot is, at least in part, due to the way the rural continues to be seen as offering an escape from the world and thus from globalization, in what Ricoeur would call a pathological utopian imagination. Literature, film, and television play a crucial role in sustaining this imagination, which is so powerful that even many inhabitants of the rural remain invested in it. The project, a comparative study of 5 countries, the US, the UK, the Netherlands, China, and South Africa, explores how the cultural imagination of the rural in each context and the global cultural imagination of the rural that runs across them makes only certain aspects of contemporary rural life visible. It asks why this is the case and how this affects the rural's political mobilization. Geographers, sociologists, economists, and political scientists in the field of rural studies have produced valuable accounts of what rural globalization looks like on the ground and in the social imagination. Establishing a productive dialogue with this work is one of our main goals. So far, we have found many connections and complementarities, but there have also been challenges, as in all interdisciplinary scholarship, because of divergent ideas about how research should be conducted and presented, and because concepts are not always used in the same way. Once again, the objective, I believe, is not to achieve a merging of perspectives that would resolve these tensions, but to stay with the trouble by attending to them. This means taking the findings of these social scientists seriously, but also challenging the view that empirical research in the rural is all that matters, and insisting on the value of our close narrative, visual, and discursive analyses of specific, widely viewed and read cultural imaginations. At a time when the humanities are commonly dismissed as irrelevant and useless, it is particularly important to stress that from such analyses, much can be learned about perceptions of the rural and how these perceptions influence its materiality and politics. To conclude and to demonstrate that it is necessary to go beyond what Best and Marcus call the surface in order to truly attend to the object, I will now do a quick close reading, which is really only the beginning of a close reading. The object is a cultural imagination of the Dutch rural, a 2013 milk commercial by Friesland Campina, a big dairy corporation. The commercial is in Dutch, so I have provided in the form of subtitles a translation of the voice-over text. And we're probably not going to get sound again, but the sound is not that important. So please pay attention to the subtitles, which are in English, and the way what is said relates to what is shown on the screen. Next slide. And please play the video. Thank you. Next slide. So, it's okay. Thank you. So on the surface, this commercial, and you have to imagine a kind of idyllic musical accompaniment to the images, and then the voiceover quite seriously speaking the words on the screen. On the surface, this commercial indicates that it is moving away from claiming special powers for milk, as earlier milk commercials created by the Dutch Dairy Bureau famously did through the slogan, "Milk the White Motor." This was very famous advertising slogan in the Netherlands. Every Dutch person would be able to tell you this. So the idea was that milk kind of powers you forward, particularly when you're a child. Instead, this commercial asserts that milk is just milk, that it is something natural, and that while made in the Netherlands, it is exported globally. This, the first voiceover insists, is not a fairy tale, but the reality of milk. However, if we look and listen more closely, attending to the tensions between what is said and shown, to how things are said and shown, and to what is not said or shown, the message is revealed to be more complicated. First of all, the final statement that the story of milk is perhaps just as special as a fairy tale, and thus still like a fairy tale, ensures that the commercial can present itself as getting real about milk while still imbuing it with a little magic. In this respect, it is significant that the claim that milk will not make you cycle faster or jump higher is never actually denied. The question is asked but not answered, and by showing a very fast cyclist and a very high jumper as it is being asked, the idea that milk can magically enhance performance is visually maintained. Second, the commercial emphasizes milk's naturalness by stating that it cannot be made in a factory. This denies the processing milk undergoes before it reaches consumers, and the way farms have become so mechanized that they resemble factories. The large shed with milking equipment and many cows with ear and ankle tags that is shown as the word factory is spoken suggests that dairy farms in the Netherlands are in fact quite like factories. Showing the shed in black and white, which makes the machines and tags stand out less and gives the images an old-fashioned nostalgic feel, and contrasting the inside of the shed with color shots of cows in green fields, works against the association between farm and factory, but cannot fully dispel it. Third, although the commercial seems to acknowledge rural globalization by presenting milk as a global export product, in imagining globalization as a one-way street of a product made right here in the Netherlands going out into the world, Friesland Campina's status as an international cooperative and dairy farming's reliance on international trade in cow sperm, equipment, and feed are obscured. More insidiously, the commercial emphasizes the Dutchness of the milk, transferring the quality of naturalness associated with milk to the Dutch nation. It also portrays this nation as exclusively white. All non-white people featured in the commercial are situated in or associated with other parts of the world. Fourth, the commercial, despite purporting to tell the real story of milk, leaves out crucial parts of this story. Milk is labeled natural, even though dairy cows are bred through artificial insemination and have their milk production stimulated by special feed, constant breeding, and the removal of their calves. Dairy farming is also inaccurately presented as an exclusively male profession, with the only woman pictured on a farm not working, but watching a male farmer work. Much more could be said about this commercial's affirmation of an idyllic view of the rural that ties it to a patriarchal notion of Dutch national identity, a view that is currently being mobilized politically in ongoing farmers' protests against government measures to reduce nitrogen emissions, and in the policies proposed by the new ascendant political party called the Farmer Citizens Movement. But I hope to have shown that looking beyond the commercial stated message at its specificities is necessary to make it speak up, in this case against its own claim that it is not presenting a fairy tale. Attending to the noise to re-invoke Steyerl's term, that operates across the surface to scramble the commercial's overt message is not reading something into the text, but teasing something out of it in a careful act of criticality. In a world where too many things are taken in at a glance, in a rush, a criticality that takes the time to parse words and images and refuses to believe that anything, whether ghosts, milk, or reading, is ever just itself, is arguably a vital skill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther, for your wonderful speech. I enjoyed a lot and have learned a lot about your Brew Imaginations project, as well as your reminds me how I was your student in 2011, like 12 years ago, when I learned close reading and service reading. I think it must be very new, like for our Chinese audience here. I see we have students from Shanghai Jiaotong University, my institute, but also from other affiliations. So during the time that I will pass my mic to Professor Guo, our discussion of today's public lecture, to share his insightful thoughts with us and to give a response to Esther's speech.
Thank you, Pen.
At the meantime, dear audience, thank you so much for joining her research. If you have any questions for Esther, please, you can use the chat box to leave your comments, and we will also have a discussion and answer section following Professor Guo's commentaries. Thank you.
Our chairperson and the Professor Peering, right?
Yeah.
It's very nice meeting you online, and it's my honor to be the discussant of your very interesting speech. I think I learned quite a lot from your speech in terms of different methodologies, as well as the use of the metaphorical concept of ghosts in applying the analysis of, maybe what you mentioned about colonialism, about globalization, and things like that sort. I think, first of all, you mentioned the methodology of cultural analysis. I think that's quite interesting. Particularly, I found it, it's a more like a constructive process, and doing an in-depth interpretation of the phenomenon that we see, in this world. Particularly, I think your adoption of intersubjectivity among the analyzing subject and its relationships to like object and concept is quite an interesting perspective. And you mentioned that you are doing the cultural imagination analysis instead of the representational analysis. I think this is a very interesting, angle to decipher the phenomenon that we see in the world. Particularly, I think the representation idea is a more passive concept in defining things, instead of your idea of cultural imagination seems to be more active. Okay, and instead of using otherworldliness, as your interpretation method, I think you use the metaphorical and the cultural imagination approach to do the study. And in terms of your analysis of ghosts, I think that's the most interesting part of it. Of course, that's metaphor, okay? We also actually see some ghosts in your PPT and in the film to represent certain meanings or symbolic ideas for your presentations. And particularly, I think you want to mention that the cultural imagination of ghosts of the rural world, or maybe a peripheral world, is deeply seated in what you see. You mentioned that the cultural context is very important, but because it varies according to different places or different, time sequence, something like that. And I think I particularly like your idea of historical specificity, because that's the idea of contextual interpretation of anything that are, symbolic or imaginative, or maybe they can be understood in a more deep laying method to understand that situation. I think that's quite a good idea to use context and the specificity in your work of doing the cultural imagination work. And of course, I think I have one idea that because you show the god, no, actually you show the ghost without any faces. Okay, it's only a shape, imaginated maybe object from our interpretation, particularly from the Western perspective ghost, because we have different kinds of ghosts and we view it differently as well. But in general, I think what you point out is, this is also an analogy from my interpretation. They means ghosts, or those things that are regarded as ghosts, right? Like the rural area, something like that. They have no faces. They may haunt you. They may linger all the way around, or they need to be exorcised. Okay, they need to be treated. They need to be, like you just mentioned that the violent punishment, in the justice system. So they are seen as criminals. Okay, just like the witches, in the Middle Age in the West, they are seen as witches, and then now they are seen as the rural world. Okay, the profane rural world, and it's quite. You point out that it's quite overwhelmed of this kind of rural image by all sorts of media, those kind of imagination, and influence our perspective, understanding the peripheral and the world, which is not urban, and which is in contrast to the sacred world of modernization, or maybe urbanities, or full citizenship, and so on and so forth. So for those peripheral and underestimated importance of the people, or the rural society, they are regarded as ghosts, as your metaphor. I think that's the most interesting thing. And you also try to show us that the metaphor of using ghosts are everywhere, right? From the past great social thinkers, to the artwork, to popular films and the fictions, and something like that. It's everywhere. So I think from your speech, I learned that it's quite interesting to find out a new perspective on looking at this like rural world, or migrants, or those peripheral society, is to use intersubjective, constructive idea of cultural imagination, this kind of cultural analysis to do the work. And then we can find out what's behind the scene. It may be, like you said, ideology, or maybe utopia, the two different extremes, but they got to be observed and understood in the historical context, and with a specific understanding attached to the meanings and maybe the historical background back to at that time. And I think in the last, I like to mention one thing of a idea of ghost as well, but it's more like to labeling the alienated people, like back into the late 19th century in China, the Qing dynasty. Actually, those Chinese people called the Caucasians, the white people, 鬼佬. 鬼佬 in English is a ghost foreigner. Okay, so we can understand what 鬼佬 means back into that time, and we can imagine, culturally what 鬼佬 is all about. I think we can, do this in your historical analysis, your cultural analysis, back to the context of East and West conflicts and the historical specificity back into that time to understand the idea of creating a ghosts, and evolving the subjective understanding of the creation of the terminology of the viewing the world. Okay, thanks again for your speech. I think it's very interesting, particularly using the metaphor of ghosts to go over and to present your idea of cultural imagination. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that elaborate and very insightful response. Pen, could you stop sharing your screen so I can maybe see you again? Yes, that's better. Yes. Thank you so much for that response. And I'm glad that some of what I said resonated with you. And indeed, my point about the cultural imagination is very much that I feel it's an active force in society, and talking about it as an imagination emphasizes that activeness. And a lot of people look at, television series or even things like social media as just kind of mirroring reality, but it actually creates reality. So one of my PhD students, Xiao Xiao, is actually working on rural Wanghongs, like Li Ziqi. I don't know how to pronounce her name, but she's very famous. And Xiao Xiao looked at her videos and really analyzes how Li draws upon, for example, quite traditional ideas about Chinese femininity taken from historical periods of Chinese history, and brings those images in how she dresses and in the kind of scenes that she creates in the rural, and how this is often not reality, right? So she sort of pretends often that she goes out the door and is then in a really mountainous, beautiful area, whereas in reality that area is like 4 hours away from where she actually lives. So there's a lot of creating being done in these representations. So I think it's much better to think of them as imaginations than as representations, and then to really look at them carefully to pinpoint what they do. And particularly, I really love your point about the importance of context, because I think even in the Western context, there's a lot of difference, for example, in how different ghosts are conceptualized. For example, the Netherlands is a Protestant country traditionally, and in Protestantism there are not nearly as many ghosts as in countries with a Catholic history. So even there within Western Europe, you can see how ghosts are very differently conceptualized and appear in very different quantities, very different situations, and are also related to in very different ways. And then if you think of, for example, African traditions of dealing with ghosts, which often involve a sort of ancestor worship, that's a very different relation again. And I think Chinese culture and also Japanese culture and Korean culture, they again have their own very specific traditions of thinking about ghostly figures. I do think there's a kind of through line, which is that ghosts always are somehow about confronting you with something that is from somewhere or sometime else. So ghosts always bring an element of otherness into the present that has to be dealt with. And how that is then dealt with is dependent on all sorts of cultural and historical specificities. But I think what attracts me to the metaphor of the ghost is because it does offer a way of thinking how in different periods, in different societies, in different cultures, we deal with being confronted with something that is other to us, and thinking about the ethical and political questions that brings with us. And finally, thank you so much about referring to the Chinese tradition of referring to white people as ghosts. Actually, in my book, The Spectral Metaphor, one chapter is about a particular film by Nick Broomfield, which is called Ghosts, and it's about migrant workers who move from China to the UK to work there, and they also refer to all the white people they see around them as ghosts. So that film really also plays with the question of who are the ghosts in this situation? Is it the Chinese migrants that are ghosts? And I would argue in certain ways, they are the ones who are made to live a kind of ghostly, invisible existence. But on the other hand, it is also the people who are making them work and who are dealing with them in the UK that are in certain ways ghostly, mainly because they tend to have the power. So I think that's a really interesting film where these two cultural traditions of thinking about ghosts are actually played out against each other in a very interesting and insightful way. So thank you so much for your comments. And it's really an honor to meet you today. Even if we can only meet online, I really hope to make it to China and especially Shanghai soon. It's been difficult to travel to China for the past periods, or even to travel within Europe. But we're getting back, so I'm hoping to meet you in person at some point.
We'd love to host you in Shanghai for sure.
Welcome to come over anytime.
Yes, yes. And
thank you.
I would like to actually open the floor for our audience. Some students from Shanghai Jiaotong University, but I also see participants who are from other universities. Very happy that our research project, our lecture series can attract students and also scholars from different places in China, but I can also see from across the globe. So I would like to open the floor and shall we end our lecture section in 10 minutes so we have sufficient time for the Q&A. Thank you, Leslie, for your time. I know you're always busy, but really I appreciate your time and support.
No, it's a pleasure. And I also see in the chat, in the on the screen that Xiao Xiao is here and Chen Zhao is here and Jen Lin is here. So it feels a bit like a reunion. It's very nice that we can all be here together in the virtual space.
Yes, yes. Professor Esther Pirin just mentioned the name, which are all Pirin's former PhD students when we graduate working in China and other places as assistant professor, some associate professor, and also Esther Pirin's your postdoc students from Rural Imaginations are also here. Xiao Xiao, right?
Yeah, my PhD students. Yeah, Xiao Xiao and Chen Zhao.
I haven't seen any questions in the chat box, but I would like to pose 3 questions, which is also linked to my my research interests, and also related to the work that I've been developing since the past 10 years. So I would like to ask about rural imagination, because in urban studies, there's lots of mentioning about we are actually in the stage of planetary urbanism. I also see that you mentioned about planetary hinterlands in your new book. So I'm very interested in learning more about how do you think, because of planetary urbanism, it actually describe our entire world and the whole planet is actually under the process of urbanization. And in this case, actually, some urban studies researchers believe there's no rural area anymore because of rapid urbanization in different places. How do you respond to this kind of criticism related to the conceptualization of the rural? And my second question also touch upon about the ghost cities. Also about your publication. In China, in the past 20 years, because of the economic reform and open door policy, right? So we have a lot of instant cities, including Shanghai is counted as instant city, but actually some cities supported by the PRC government, supported by the local government in the hope of building cities like Shanghai and Beijing, but they failed. So as I count in the number up to 2015, we have 56 ghost cities. That's what we call ghost cities in China, meaning that those cities are built, buildings, skyscrapers are built, but no one's lives there, no one works there. They cannot antiques, cannot attract foreign investment or even local investment. And then people move out. So that's kind of the theme park, abounded theme park phenomenon. So, but some scholars frame that as ghost cities. So I would like to see if you're interested to explore together with your Chinese postdoc and also your PhD students. That would be very interesting research direction. And my last point, I really enjoyed and recalled all my memory to learn about how to conduct and how to perform cultural analysis, to do close reading. And especially when you mentioned in our analysis, we have to be meticulous. So to be very careful about the object, the subject that we are going to explore and to analyze. And this is a very good technique for both quantitative research and qualitative research in cultural studies and also in sociology and media studies and communication studies across different disciplines. So I found your advice is very good. And then you use your advice and to perform, to analyze and to do this close reading of the Dutch milk advertisement. And it's not someone foreign to me. I feel very cool. It's that like how milk is naturally, it's like natural, which is very, very specific. And to mention that, I'm very curious in how do we connect actually the rural imagination in the Netherlands, so far as I know, is very different from the rural imaginary of China, because in as you remember, my Dutch classmates, some of my Dutch classmates like Colleen, Brina, they think Dutch farmers are very sexy and hot, right? They kind of rural imagine, okay, that's true, okay, and masculine, and they perform like that kind of different form of imaginations of farmers, and also farmers that are closely attached to the rural. So my last question is how do you see it when you analyze the rural imaginaries in China, but also rural imaginary in North America, in other places? That would bring like how theory travel can travel from the Netherlands to other places. So these are my 3 questions, and would love to hear your feedback. At the meantime, we really wish if you have any. Yeah, we have our Tencent meeting has 10 minutes left only. So
okay, I will try to answer your questions, which are very good. I particularly appreciate your question about planetary urbanism, because I've been working on that in relation to the Hinterlands book. I think the idea of planetary urbanism is much exaggerated. I think there is still a lot of rural processes going on in the world. And I think it's really important to think about critically why we are so eager to call everything urbanization. So there's also a lot of books coming out about the urbanization of the sea, for example, which is about how particular processes like extraction of oil and gas on the sea, or even wind energy on the sea, are processes of urbanization. But you could just as well argue that these processes are actually rural processes that are much more related to practices of agriculture or mining that have been going on in rural areas for centuries already. So I would like to think about how the difference between urbanization and ruralization is not as big as many people think it is, because the rural has also had industrialization and for a very long time. So I don't believe in planetary urbanism, to be honest. I believe in planetary capitalism and planetary colonialism as processes that are sort of making extraction a characteristic of pretty much any place in the world. But I don't think that thinking that exclusively as urbanization is very helpful. I think we should also think about how in part those processes could also be seen as forms of ruralization, which would give us a different perspective on what is happening and different ways of analyzing it. Your second question about the ghost cities, I would be very interested in looking into this more. I find it fascinating. This has also happened, for example, in Turkey, where a lot of cities were built and then in the end nobody moved there. So there's a kind of and then in Europe, you have a lot of ghost villages in countries like Spain, where it's the rural areas that are facing depopulation. So you have a lot of villages that are called ghost villages, and that are sometimes also put up for sale, where you can buy a whole village for 800 euros in Italy. So these processes of places that either were once communities or were supposed to become communities, but it never somehow happened, I find very interesting to relate, to think of in terms of their ghostliness. And then how do rural imaginations kind of compare? I think there are, again, this is the idea about the importance of context and of historicizing. Of course, the history of the way the rural has been seen in the Netherlands is much different from the way the rural has been seen in China. But I think there are interesting developments in China recently, including rural Wang Hong culture being much in ascendancy, and also rural tourism having a bit of a moment right now in China, where a lot of people are traveling from cities to stay in so-called traditional rural farmhouses to relax, and they see this as a kind of way of escaping the cities. And I think that's quite similar actually to the way the rural in the Netherlands is seen as a leisurely space of relaxation and kind of, you know, being out of the world for a bit. So I feel that in China, even though for a while, especially I think in the 1980s and 1990s, the rural was seen more as a backwards area that needed to be urbanized, needed to be modernized. I do feel that now there is also a counter trend in which the rural is becoming romanticized a little bit in the videos of someone like Li Zixi, and also in television programs like the one where the fathers take their children to rural areas to bond with them and those kinds of things. So I feel that the imaginations are also converging across cultural realms, even though it's still important to pay attention to the historical and cultural differences. I'm sure now on social media there are also some farmers in China that are thought to be quite sexy.
Yes, that's true. And we have two questions. One from Zhao Chen Zhou, asking Esther about how the imaginations also function as ghosts that are hardly visible, might different from person to person from time to time in shaping the reality. And the second question is from Fang Qidi. It's haunted or ghostness happened while verbal narration. I think so. And actions, interactions, or can be an object be inherently ghost haunted materially?
I mean, I think the last question, I think all of those, right? I think haunting or ghostliness can happen in many different ways, at many different levels. Something can be ghostly because of the narration that it tells. Something can be ghostly because of its materiality. I mean, there are, of course, particular materialities that are because of their translucency or because of their tendency to decompose, are seen as more ghostly than others. And this is also interesting to think about how ghosts tend to be materialized on screen, for example, or in theaters, right? It goes from very material ways with the literal sheet to the ghost actually looking exactly the same as all the other characters, and you just have to kind of deduce the fact that they are a ghost from the narration and from how other people may be responding to them by not seeing them or not speaking to them. So I think the ghostiness can be in many ways, and what I think is important is to always be interested in how this ghostliness exactly is being configured and what exactly makes it ghostly. So is it about visibility versus invisibility? Is it about materiality versus immateriality? Is it about something coming from the past? Is it about something being like alien or non-human? So the most important thing, I think, is asking the question, what is ghostly about this, and what does that tell us? What can we learn from thinking this particular phenomenon as ghostly? I think I forgot Sean's question again. But oh, I think what was it, Pen? Because I can't see it on the screen anymore, so I've lost it.
So another question as well, the how do imaginations also function as ghosts that are hardly visible and might differ from person to person? from time to
Oh
time.
yeah, so yeah, some imaginations also are themselves quite ghostly, right? And this, you can think about particular stories that suddenly pop up and then they seem to be everywhere and then they disappear again. Certain TV shows are extremely popular at one point and then suddenly nobody's watching them again. And now, of course, also with media, even though digital media seem to be much more ever present and much more durable, actually the preservation of digital media is more complicated often than the preservation of traditional media. So in some ways, it's easier for us to know that we will have 19th century photographs in a few centuries than to be sure that we will have all the digital material that we have now preserved in a way that will still make it accessible. I mean, a lot of the ways we also enjoy culture now are very ghostly, right? So streaming services, they give you certain content, but they can also take it away at any moment. So you have Netflix and you have a film, and then 2 weeks later, Netflix has decided to take the film away, and it might be very difficult to actually find a physical copy of a particular imagination. And this was in some ways easier in the time of, you know, physical DVDs, physical CDs, physical VHS tapes to conserve media. So I think there's a lot to say also in terms of the materiality of media and how that has changed, and how our relation to that and the way in which we conserve these media has aspects of ghostliness and possibly also haunting. So I think we can think about that. So what is it about the digital world that brings us new experiences of ghostliness and haunting?
Very much for your response, Esther. And I think also Professor Li, Professor Lin Jian comment that it's the preconditions of haunting. I really enjoyed the discussion, and your presentation today also remind us to think of the materiality and immateriality attached and related to ghost, and also the ghostly spectral. Not only that, but based on our discussion and our conversation, I feel that it's also linked to memories. So from the clip that you showed is about memories, the ghost forgot why and who he or it was waiting. So seems like taking away someone's memories is also how one is being killed. That's very important when we study the nation, how the nation built and established. Mentioning about they have, for example, in China, the establishment of China, we mentioned about our 5,000 years of civilization. So it's also one part to construct a strong nation in relation to memory. I really enjoyed today's talk. I hope I can see actually I received private message saying that some of our students would like to apply for exchange program to the University of Amsterdam at the UvA. It would be great if I can connect you to our scholars and students first by email, and then I hope you can join us in Shanghai materially.
I hope so too. I hope so too. And thank you again for organizing all this and helping me with the app. It's always a bit disconcerting when suddenly the app only speaks Chinese when you cannot understand a word of Chinese.
Thank you so much. So
thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Our Professor Zhou Deng is here. Lin Jian is a professor at Zhejiang University. Thank you so much. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.